I took my first ever flight in my life in my undergrad in sophomore. So the international travel was my first international travel. I was very scared when I was coming here.
I imagine so.
And I remember once we had crossed, from the Asian continent, and I was like in the American continent. I could see it on my screen on the flight.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm so far away now. Like, what do I do? I
Yes.
can't go back.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That was the first feeling I had when I landed in the US. But the decision to come here itself gives you the courage because you're putting a lot at stake.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Be Excellent podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Harrison Smith. Today, I have the honor of interviewing one of the people I work in the lab with, who is a PhD candidate named Tanya Purwar. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brandon.
All right. So, you specialize in fluid mechanic controls that focus on advancing future aviation and noise reduction and energy efficiency, and even deal with social challenges. So, but before we get into those things, your research and some of the advice you have to give, let's talk about a little bit where you're from.
So I'm from the eastern part of India, from the state of West Bengal, Kolkata. But my parents migrated there before I was born. So I'm actually from the northern part of the country.
Okay.
But I was born and brought up in Kolkata, in India.
What are some of your favorite experiences from that place? Do you have any favorite food, favorite attractions or things that you like to do there? Something you miss?
There's actually a lot of things. I really miss the culture and the diversity that, that exists in the city as well as the country as a whole. But I think if you are ever visiting Kolkata, I would say you should try the biryani. Which is like a rice preparation.
Okay.
And the specialty is that it comes with, so it's slow cooked rice with spices and everything, but it has potato in it. So biryani is also cooked in other parts of the country, like in the north, in the south, and it's all different. So they do not put potatoes. So it's a very famous thing back in India. Like if you talk to somebody from south or from the north, they would be like, no, ours is better. Or ours. So there's like always a fight.
Yes.
But I think ours is better.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As you should. So you're in mechanical engineering here at Purdue, but you weren't always there. You at some place you was a little girl who, first got inspired by STEM. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I think firstly, I belong to a family that has a lot of engineers. My father is an engineer. My uncles are engineers, and they all are from like different backgrounds. So they're from like the civil engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So I obviously grew up, with a lot of being around people doing math and, pushing me to do a lot of math and, always being, around. Like I was always told that I have to study science. I should, so I didn't honestly know anything other than, not doing this sort of. So that was kind of the starting point. So I was never told that, you should probably study humanities or you should probably study.
You didn't have a choice to be a lawyer or a politician.
No, I didn't know those were options until I was like here a few years back.
Okay.
So the only options I had was becoming an engineer or a doctor. I think it's pretty common in Indian households.
Yes.
And so was mine. But I was honestly never pressured by my parents.
Okay.
It's just that I didn't have like a career guide or I was not exposed to other things. I grew up seeing them and I myself thought that, this is what probably I should be doing. I tried really hard to be good at mathematics. My father was like my teacher, and then I was always trying my best to do, as much as I could. I was very fascinated by physics in general. So that was there. And then I think after some time, the question came like, what do I actually want to do within STEM? Because there's so much, right? You can do biology.
You're stealing my questions, but yes.
Yeah. So kind of like that's when I started exploring. And when I was in my high school, I started reading these science fiction novels where I was also like I was delving into those astrophysics theories and, just trying to explore just literally out of like the fiction movies that I was watching and, those things, not because like I was kind of
Do you have any
intrigued.
favorite movies or anything that you could pick out?
I think in general, like just watching movies like Star Wars
Okay.
movies and stuff like that was something that always intrigued me. But I think more than that, there were some of my friends who would also discuss with me about these things. So like I always studied in a girls' school, so
Okay.
it was only females, and so some of them also were probably they got to know about it from somebody, and they were reading, and I got intrigued. So there was this astrophysicist. His name was Michio Kaku. And of course, Stephen Hawking was famous. We were all growing up. We were always looking up to him and, his works. But I started reading Michio Kaku's books, and they talked about parallel worlds, and he simplified the concepts of astrophysics, explaining all these fantasy stuff in terms of physics, but simple.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I, got very interested. And I always thought that I'll do astrophysics and, I'll do aerospace. And then at one point I thought I'll get into the Air Force in India, the army side of aerospace. But then I realized maybe that won't work out. And because of so many requirements that they have. And I think I was not fitting everything from whatever brief I had read. But honestly, I believe I did not pursue that again because I didn't have the guidance. I didn't have a role model, or I didn't know anybody who was in Air Force. So like I didn't know how to do what to do.
So it might be something that you would have pursued if you had more guidance.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So, and I think that's with a lot of other professions.
Absolutely.
So engineering was easy.
Okay. So you got into engineering. What made you choose mechanical engineering though?
Yeah, so actually my undergrad is in aerospace engineering and applied mathematics. So I was in my high school again, and I attended 2 sessions thanks to my school. They took us all to Dr. Anita Sengupta's session, who was a propulsion engineer on the Mars Curiosity rover that landed on Mars with NASA. And she was overlooking the part of the landing. So that was one of the first experiences of seeing a female engineer, aerospace engineer, who had been working in the US with NASA and was an Indian. So that kind of gave me a boost. And then I met with Dr. Sunita Williams, who was in the space and is of Indian origin again. So those were some of the females that I actually physically met. She was there and she spoke to us. And that's where my, interest started. And I started believing that, I don't just have to do computer science or civil like my other family members were doing. I could do something different. Which was aerospace. So
that's pretty powerful. And you got to meet some really cool people.
Yes.
I imagine that definitely has a strong influence. So what then, I guess, put you on a trajectory to make it to Purdue or get a master's, get a PhD? Or was that always in the cards for you?
Not really, honestly. Like I honestly, once I got into undergrad, I was just enjoying my undergrad because high school was very stressful, trying to get into college, giving the national level exams and preparing for them all the time. I kind of let it go and I just enjoyed my undergrad in the beginning. And then slowly going deeper into aerospace, thankfully, I was able to do internships starting my sophomore year. So I did my first internship at the end of my sophomore year, or second year, as we call it, the second year of engineering. And there onwards, I got very interested in fluid mechanics because I was able to conduct experiments in my internships. So I was assisting this PhD student back then, and he was working in a water tunnel and doing these experiments with airfoil, measuring aerodynamics around the airfoil, drag and lift, etc. And believe me, I still do those things. So right, like it was very interesting how that started, and then I did more internships in a national laboratory in India, in more universities around, in my country, which were at a better level, had better facilities as compared to my own university. And I think being able to do those experiments or doing computational work, having those resources kind of made me realize that, this is the path that I should take, this, the research path, and I need to do a little more to get better at this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how like I realized that, and also jobs were not available for an aerospace undergraduate in core industry in India. We are still getting better at this. There is one very amazing research organization, which is the National Research Organization, ISRO.
Mm-hmm.
ISRO is the Space Research Organization of India,
Okay.
just like we have NASA in the US.
Sure.
And recently, in fact, last week, we have landed on Moon very successfully. So that was one major organization that was working. But other than that, the private organizations were not as established yet. We are still a young country.
Sure.
We are still a developing nation, and we're doing really well for where we've come from. But having enough jobs in the core field was not an option. So honestly, not having that option, the only option I had was to pursue my master's or PhD. And having done a lot of internships around the country itself in the good universities, I thought maybe to get a little more exposure coming outside the country would be a better option. So
nice. Okay.
And of course, the infrastructure here is way better. There's more to learn. So that was kind of my inspiration to come out.
True. So then what landed you at Purdue though?
So interestingly, I applied to a lot of universities, and my GRE score was not like amazing. It was an average score. I think I needed to, an amazing score was like around 325, and I was at 315 or something like that.
Yeah, it's cutthroat. Yes.
Yeah, it's cutthroat. So I actually applied to universities where I thought I would get accepted, like not the first year, but below that in the US, and I got accepted from some of them for a PhD program. With Purdue, I was not applying because the cutoff was 325 for GRE. But then I spoke with a friend who was in the US pursuing aerospace engineering. She was a female. And she told me that your profile is good. You've done so many internships. You have research experience. Just apply, And I was like, they won't even select me. So I was absolutely not doing it. I applied a day before the applications were going to, the deadline was over. And she was like, just do it. It's fine. And I just did it. And I got in. I was accepted at the master's program, and then I was able to convert it to a PhD program.
Nice.
So it was very interesting.
Yeah. And I like that story because sometimes we get in our own head and in our own way. What's the harm from applying? They say no.
Yeah.
Then what, right? You're in the same position that you were prior to applying. You're no further backwards in your progress. So I think that's very important. And I like the fact that you did a lot of internships, because I think university is really good at, preparing you with tools and information and physics and engineering and things of that nature, but you don't get as much experiences as you can get from an internship. And that internship shapes your mind. It shapes whether you want to continue to do this. Maybe you do the internship and you're just like, this isn't for me. I don't ever want to see aerospace anything ever again. I thought I would be doing something cooler. Or you start to love it even more and you become even more passionate about it. But I think not doing the internships is a wasted opportunity if you don't do it. My question to you next is, so you got here and you work with our advisor, Dr. Luciano Castillo, and you're doing some of the same work that you were doing. I guess some of your internships applies now, but you are also merging some of that information of mechanical engineering, aero, and social challenges. Can you tell me how you came to do that? Because these worlds, I think to most people would seem separate. If you want to deal with social challenges, you probably want to get into politics, and changing policies and applying certain resources to certain areas. I don't think people naturally come to the conclusion of bridging these worlds together, but I think they should. So I want you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, I think, thanks. That's a very good question. Thank you for asking. I think my inspiration stemmed from several different sources
Sure.
in my grad school. The one of the biggest ones is my advisor, Dr. Luciano Castillo. I think his passion for also working towards seeing how he can use renewable energy to make better the lives of people and economically lower countries where there are there's lack of energy, there's lack of resources, where he's trying really hard, especially with, say, Latin American countries. And he belongs from Puerto Rico, and he's been doing a great work trying to bring resources to Puerto Ricans, to other Latin American communities, so that they can strive, get into graduate schools,
Sure.
have more access to energy, can deal with all the natural disasters that are going around, that, keep occurring, and bringing down the country's social as well as economic system. So it's kind of like it told me that you can dream big and you can think of solving big problems in life. So, which I never thought, I could ever do as a grad student. He gave us that power and showed us by example that, this is something that is possible. And then through him, I met with more people, more professors, more people in the academic community as well as industry, who are all motivated to work towards, the betterment of the society. So that was kind of the starting point where I thought, okay, so I do hold a lot of power, even as a graduate student, as somebody who is trained in engineering, who has so many resources and, tools being at Purdue University. I realized that, the famous line from Spider-Man, like, with great power comes great responsibility. I kind of realized that after, and the starting point was the Binational Conference in 2021, which was held at the US-Mexico border, which was a collaboration between Dr. Luciano Castillo and some professors from across the border, as well as from US universities closer to the border. So there I saw the ideas were crazy. Okay. They were crazy big, crazy in the sense that, things that we do not really always think about. We do not really, think that, we see people do those things. We see in the television that, oh, this guy is doing this big thing. But then, like, for me, it was like that. It was a moment like that for me where I saw that, okay, these are like really important things they're discussing. They were discussing policy, they were discussing technology, they were discussing energy, they were discussing like an entire ecosystem of issues. And the thing was about water, energy, food nexus around the border, as well as having an energy corridor instead of having the wall between the US-Mexico border. So it was very interesting how politics was coming together with science. And I know in our history, scientists and academics have had a very big role to play in very big projects.
Absolutely.
Right? That had advanced politics as well as the social conditions of a country, the economic conditions of a country.
Right.
But
good or bad.
good or bad. But yeah, but here I was seeing it firsthand in 2021, as an immigrant, female immigrant from a developing country.
Yes.
So very interesting experience there. And that's where I kind of got into, the idea that there is a social impact that engineering has, which is huge, and it is our responsibility to take care of it. And there, along with talking about technology and energy, and sustainability, we started talking about the human aspects of problems that occur at the border. There were some professors, one of whom is now my committee member on my PhD advisory committee. I met with her there and collaborated with her there onwards. And she was a professor in women and gender studies. Very interestingly, she brought up the points of the human aspect of border issues, migration that occurs. And although we want to build a technology and energy corridor across, between the border or at the border, we have to always look at the human aspects of things because they go hand in hand. So that was kind of the beginning. And then I was I have been doing some research, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. We pivoted to doing research related to more essential COVID-19 related research,
Mhm.
where we were working on several different technologies, out of which one of it was a mask that, as a team in our lab, we came up with a novel filter design which could inactivate viruses, the respiratory viruses, as well as filter at a higher efficiency as compared to the existing commercial masks that we have been using.
Mhm.
Also, it was a reusable filter, so it was sustainable. So there were so many aspects to this filter, and we were like, we published our work. It got a lot of recognition. However, when I was presenting this work once within the lab meeting, and even my committee members were there, the member that I'm talking about, Dr. Maisa Khatib, she is from Arizona State University, and she asked me this question that, what do you as a female in the team, because I was the only female on that team, bring to your research, and how do you think of this mask as a product, could be applied to females in a differently as compared to males? Do you
Mhm.
think there is a way, or there could be some issues that can happen for a female that would not probably exist for a male, and vice versa? Maybe they exist for a male and they don't exist for a female. And my answer was like, of that unaware engineer who always has thought of the world of engineering in terms of mathematics and physics. I was like, no, I am an engineer just like my counterpart. So we're all equals. And the product is a mask. Everybody will use it the same way. Its breathability is better. And that's where I was pointed out for the first time that, it applies differently. And that's where, like, she pointed out to me about, for example, just an example, that females have different hormonal phases because of which their breathing cycles also differ during those phases. And if I am taking a standard, standard value at, I have gotten so much better, say X percentage better with my breathability of the mask. I am not actually saying that for an average female. I'm actually saying that for an average male.
Mhm.
Um, Along with that, skin issues and size of the mask, the
Or makeup.
fitting,
I remember that was a big deal
the
too with
makeup was a big deal. So these are some of the issues which she was expecting that me as a female would bring to the table in the team. But we have been trained as such in this entire world of engineering and STEM that we do not look at our research through a gender lens, or we do not think of the social implications of the problems that are existing. We think of technology, we are capable of doing those things very efficiently, but we somehow, in that pipeline of doing our research and sending it to become a product in the industry, we actually keep on increasing the biases
Mm.
that exist, especially the social biases.
Yeah, so I think that's all a great point. The human element and our technology and the ideas we have. I think a lot of times we try to universally approach problems, but not everything, I think sometimes it's okay to point out differences. Um, I think there's times where we over put out differences and or we under, like we either over what do we talk about in math? We oversimplify. We oversimplify the problem or we overcomplicate the problem.
Yeah.
But there's probably this middle ground in which we should exist in.
Yes.
And I think that's where a lot of the research that you're working on handles. So you talking about gender lens as it applies into STEM, noise reduction that you're working on, and then I think you're also working with immigration and
Migration
migration,
and
yeah,
climate change.
migration and climate change as well. And you're trying to humanize the engineering approaches there as well. So I think that's pretty cool.
Thank you.
So you're within the year, you'll be defending, and I'm very excited to. You'll do well, but I'm very excited to see you defend this, and I think your research and information needs to be put out there. That's one of the reasons why, specifically, I think you're a very strong female engineer, but I think also the research that you have to talk about is very important. I think people need to hear a lot about this. I think sometimes when we think about engineering, we think about like we think about the airplanes, astronauts. We think about like cars. We think about bridges. We don't necessarily always think about social challenges,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that that opens the door to tackling so many things, you know, as an engineer. So I would consider you a pretty successful person at this point. I know you're like, well, I haven't defended yet. I don't have my PhD, but I think even making it this far is phenomenal. Like as you stated before, growing up, there wasn't a lot of, you know, mentors or people that you had influences. You were very fortunate to have people come talk, but I imagine there's a lot of women out there who didn't, right? What do you credit to your success thus far? You know, what has caused you not to want to give up or not to want to deter from the path that you're on?
One of the biggest things would be, like I said, having a mentor or somebody to follow, somebody who has laid down the path for you and
Mm,
has done something where you feel like, okay, this is possible. You know, the possibility of things and the uncertainty of things not being possible. So I think for me, I would say I'm a privileged person. I
sure.
belong to a family who has been very, very supportive of whatever I have been doing,
Sure.
as well as I have somehow attracted or been surrounded by people who were doing something different.
Mm,
So whenever I thought, I don't know, whether this is possible, I met with somebody who was doing something, maybe not the same thing,
sure.
but I knew that there is a possibility. And majorly, whatever drove me to continue and keep doing it was seeing fellow females do it, honestly.
Mm,
That I think made a lot of difference for me, because when I saw that, okay, a female can do this, then I could relate to a female more. So
mm,
I, be it a friend in my undergraduate, or be it, the two female engineers who are astronauts, female
mm-hmm,
engineer astronauts I met who work with NASA, or be it coming to the US and then working with fellow, students,
mm-hmm.
working with friends around me, looking at female professors, as
Okay.
well as just also my advisor himself. So
Yeah.
being from,
So like having that great support system, but more importantly, also having, you know, seeing people that look like you in those roles is probably very empowering.
yes,
And then not only just seeing them, like I think it's one thing seeing people in books, in history books, but then it's one thing having that exposure probably even earlier on because it just
yes,
gives you so much empowerment that you can do it. And I think something that I think you're underselling here is your ability to reach out to people when you don't necessarily have that confidence. All right. I don't I know you enough to know that like when there's something you're not confident about or something that you have questions about, you take the initiative to go meet that person. You're going to like, you know what? I don't have confidence in it. What do you think? What is your opinion? And like, I think that's something that everybody doesn't have. A lot of people are timid and they are just scared. And so they just won't ask those questions. They won't go reach out to those people. And I think, they can, people could use a little bit of your courage for sure. I think to be successful like you have been. All right. So we weren't going to keep this too long, but I got a couple more questions.
Mhm.
So you transitioned to Purdue from India, and I imagine that had to be a wild experience. I'm not sure how much international traveling you've done up until that point, if you were well versed in that, or was this like, were you a fish out of water? But I imagine that regardless of what your circumstances were, I imagine there was a transition period, a bit of roughness that came with transporting yourself over here and leaving your family behind. Was there something that you think that you learned from that transition period that you think might be helpful for other people coming behind you to know?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. And I think, yes, it is. Um, so, firstly, I took my first ever flight in my life in my undergrad in
Mhm.
sophomore. So, the international travel was my first international travel. I was very scared when I was coming here.
I imagine so.
And I remember once we had crossed, from the Asian continent, and I was like in the American continent. I could see it on my screen on the flight.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm so far away now. Like, what do I do? I
Yes.
can't go back.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That was the first feeling I had when I landed in the US. But the decision to come here itself gives you the courage because you're putting a lot at stake. There is a lot at risk because I come from a middle class background.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult for my parents financially to make this decision to, support me coming to the US. And with that, having to, basically come all the way here and then just settle down, the new house, you're so far from the country. There's a culture shock aspect, definitely, but there's so much of logistics that you have to do. So yes, of course, it is. I mean, for any student coming from outside the country, it is a very similar experience, I would say, difficult and very overwhelming. But I think a very good thing about universities, such universities where there are so many resources that if you can reach out and if you know whom to reach out, there are these small Facebook groups, there are WhatsApp groups, the university itself provides you like a list of resources. So if you are aware and if you are like following everything that is being told to you and you're reaching out, like you said, I think definitely following up, reaching out, making that extra effort, coming out of your comfort zone and just talking to one person solves a lot of problems. So
Absolutely. And so how was it transferring like academically? Do you think it was an easy progression? Was there any issues that you might have like had or had to overcome in that? Or was it like seamless? Like you were just like, it's easy.
yeah, so I think in the beginning, when I came here, I grabbed onto the first research opportunity I got. So I interviewed with some professors. I got into a very good research lab in mechanical engineering. However, my research ideas or whatever I was learning was not aligning with whatever I actually wanted to pursue.
Okay.
So that realization came after a lot of struggles because initially you self-doubt. So I thought that maybe I'm not competent enough to do this. But it wasn't that. It was just that I was not at the right place. And so I was not using my skills completely. So this is one mistake that we do as young researchers who are coming from, another country, especially if you're in an international land and you're on a visa, you need funding. Funding is a big part. It's a lot of money if you are paying. So you always look out for funding. So if somebody is funding you and telling you that, this is the research you have to do. And, when you're that young out of undergrad, you think you can do everything.
Yes,
right?
yes.
You think you can just, you don't have so many like strong opinions about things. You're like, I will do anything that comes my way. I'm going to persist. I'm going to do it. I'll work very hard. And when you cannot do it, you feel like you are not competent and your confidence goes down. And I exactly went through that in the first year of my experience at Purdue. I was looking for guidance. And then again, like a fellow lab mate from that lab was guiding me, helping me. And, I came to realization that maybe I was not meant to be in that place. And, through there's a process and I went through that process. I got a lot of support from people around me, always telling me that, no, it's not just your mistake. It's okay. At that point, it was a huge thing for me, right? Because I was at the lowest. I thought I'll just do a master's non-thesis and leave. I don't think I'm competent enough to complete my PhD or even do a master's thesis. That is where I was standing. From there, I picked up and thanks to my friends and thanks to fellow, professionals who were around me who had experienced something like this. So again, reaching out. I took the courage of reaching out to somebody who I knew kind of had a similar experience. So I found a role model again, a mentor.
Right.
And that person was able to tell me that, listen, it's okay. It's just 1 year of your life. It won't even matter in the end. And this is not a failure. It's just a part of, learning and experiencing new things. I also went through a phase during this phase, like, my physical health started deteriorating, my mental health started going down because obviously you're under a lot of stress. You're a 22, 23-year-old individual outside. You're very far from your home, thousands
Yeah,
of
I was
miles
about to say
away.
it's got to be a lot of shock there.
Yes, it's
That's
all together, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't even tell my parents that I was going through all of this because I was like, I'm just supposed to go. So I honestly, for a year or a year and a half, I didn't even realize that there was something wrong in feeling this way. I thought this is a part of the struggle. I'm supposed to feel this way. But that's not, once I was out of it, I realized it was not like that. So again, I was taking a course with my current advisor and I just reached out to him wildly one, morning while he was teaching because I really liked the things he was teaching and it aligned with what I wanted to do, what I had done in my previous internships and my undergrad research. And he interviewed me and it perfectly, got together. And now I'm very happy. I have been working with him for 3.5 years now. I've accomplished a lot with him. So I am now in the right place. So, and I have met with more students, like more fellow researchers here who have been through a similar experience. And this time, at least 2 or 3 people, I have been able to guide them and, tell them that it's okay. You can change your advisor if you're not liking the research. You can do that. And they have done it and they're happier now. So like, like a butterfly effect. Like you are constantly, or a rippling effect. You're constantly like, putting it down. So I think talking, reaching out, there are resources within the, like at Purdue, within the universities, there are many resources. There are student bodies. You can reach out to them. There are the graduate school bodies. There you can, if you have any physical or mental health issues, there are, you have the hospital. The university hospital they're very nice. When I was getting diagnosed and I had so many different symptoms, this and that, I went to them and they were very nice, and this was all happening during the pandemic. The pandemic was starting, things were changing, but I got diagnosed and I was like treated very well, and I've been just fine ever since then. So I think
That's awesome. No, I think that's a very powerful and very important story that I believe all people and students need to hear. I think you know I want to say this is impressive is like you have a superpower of reaching out. I think a lot of your things don't change for you had you not reached out. I think and just reached people and just said, hey, I'm interested in being in your lab. Hey, I like the things you're talking about. Hey, I'm having a problem with this. And just the empowerment that you got from the knowledge or the encouragement you got through your situations. Moving forward, so one, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about your research. We talked about some of these experiences. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to talk about? Any questions you want to ask?
so. I think one of the things I want to point out is that firstly about my research that I have been using only tools in engineering to do all the aspects of social impact of engineering. So we
Okay.
should know that whatever, as engineers, you don't have to go and learn a new course. You don't have to take courses in social sciences. You don't have to learn and take new courses in policy or humanities. It is what you are learning in engineering
Mm,
is like powerful enough for you to participate in how you can create an impact with your work. So I really want to point that out to anybody who is doing their work, that look at your work through a gender lens. Climate change is a very big issue currently, and we have to know that whatever problems we're trying to solve, whatever proposals we're writing, whatever we're doing, there's always a motivation, and they're all intertwined problems. They are not isolated issues. So whenever we're talking about building anything, any technology, any research that will take the form of a product, please always look into the social aspect of that problem and try to see how you can use tools in engineering to really create a difference. So I think that's one thing. And another thing, like I want to thank you and congratulate you, Brandon.
thank
We are very lucky to have an amazing postdoc like you in our lab, and you're doing such great work. It's inspiring. And I think one of the things I wanted to ask you was when we were doing this study related to gender lens in
Sure.
STEM, we saw that a lot of our data revealed that racial bias and gender bias go hand in hand. So I wanted to know about your opinion. I know like you have delved deeper into technology and research around this. So what do you think about that? And is there anything through engineering or any example that you have where you have seen, an evident, um, display of this issue?
Yes, I think that's a good question. On this podcast, I haven't really talked too much about my research for my PhD. And so what we built was a device that goes on the back of a cell phone to make measurements, skin measurements on newborn babies that are jaundiced. Um, and then we also did some studies over COVID on pulse oximeters. And what we were seeing is that there is a difference. There was a racial bias that we were seeing between measurements made on lighter skinned babies versus darker skinned babies. And those measurements were leading to under or overestimation of values. And so, to the audience who's listening, they're just like, okay, over and underestimation. What does that mean? Well, each thing meant something different. So if you overestimate something, it could mean that you're telling someone that they need a blood transfusion when they don't. Or it can mean that you're telling someone that they're okay and they're healthy and they're actually very sick. And that could really lead to a lot of poor outcomes. We didn't get to talk about this too much, but even in genderless, there's so many devices besides the mask. Such I think in some of the studies you've done, you talked about car crashes, I think too, right? I think you know the statistics better than I do, but car crashes had a greater impact on women. And that's just due to like not necessarily including this gender lens. And we see the same thing in racial bias is that there's not a really great um, lens that's performed, I think, in some of the clinical studies. People are starting and they have been trying to do it. But I think sometimes how we distribute our data and information with the study, like for instance, I imagine like if I did a study and I said I'm applying a gender lens, but I have 10 males I did the study on and 2 females I did the study on, that's going to impact,
Yeah.
my results. And so my results might look good, but are they really good?
Yeah.
If I had 5 black babies and I had 20 white babies, in my study, I included black people. I included, these darker pigmented people, but like the distribution doesn't necessarily always bode well to how the product's going to end up. So like, I think there needs to be a greater focus on those things. And I think this is just my opinion. I'm early on in my research career. I think it's okay to say we're different.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we're really just trying to get this universal one size fits all solution to a problem. And there may not be. All right. It might, and I know it costs more money. I think that's really the issue. It costs more money if things are different. Okay. I think there's got to be this balance between saying things can be universal and things can be different.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, when it comes to racial bias, there's probably this sweet point in which you can make a universal device. And then there's this point where you got to say that they're separate and different, and we need some different technologies for that. And same thing here for cars. Obviously, no one wants to say, all right, this is a female car. This is a male car. Nobody wants to do that. But maybe there's a solution in between all of that. And I think that's kind of all we're saying. I don't think we're trying to like rewrite history and make things like extra complicated for people. We're just saying like maybe just do your due diligence to consider these things and consider the impact they may have on these groups.
I think we just need to stop being ignorant now and accept that we have to include everything and everybody. And I think this is not just on the part of one section of the society. All of us play a role in this. So when there is a bias that exists in design, in research, or in a product, all of us have somewhere played a role in it because we also now do research, right? And it's not always that we are able to include a gender lens or a racial lens or, so we have to start being more and more aware and, and it's happening.
Yes,
a lot of positive change is happening. So that's undeniable. It's just that we have to get further, especially in engineering. We have to be more aware of these problems. But yes, I think we are moving to a positive direction.
Okay. And before I wrap up and end this, I do want to ask a question. For maybe researchers or people out there who are like, how do I even start? I didn't even know that I may not be including a gender lens. Where do I start? And like, yeah, where do I start with trying to include a gender lens? Is there simple things I can do, or is it very complicated? Like, what can I do?
I think the most basic thing that I'm also in a phase of learning, and
Sure.
I'm also a student. I'm also every day I get to know something new, and I'm trying to do that. Firstly, of course, you have to talk with your advisor if you're a researcher,
Sure.
a graduate student, and make sure that all of you are at the same page and try to
Oh, on same
create
track,
more.
right?
Yes, you have to create more awareness. There's funding. There's so many issues that come within research itself.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I think your part is to just do a quick search, just look for some tools, and they exist. So you just have to look out and see whether whatever research you're doing, say it's related to some kind of a flow, or say like some body fluid flow or something like that, say, for example, or with cells, or it could just be literally design, like in a, like a car seat belt design, right? All you have to do is just maybe do a quick Google search or some search where you're able to just check, ask the right question that does this affect females differently? Does this affect males differently? Does this affect, pregnant females differently? Or, somebody who is obese, does it
Mm-hmm.
affect them differently? Has some body issue, or is people with disability, is it different for them? So although we are there, but I think at the end of us as researchers, we sometimes tend to overlook these things unless it is specifically pointed out in the grant, right? So it's a quick Google search, to be honest. And then what you can do is the next step would be just looking out for data. So if you are working with any kind of data, or you're trying to present a case in your, say, lab, and you're trying to make and show the gaps in the research problem, try to put a slide on this too, that this is also an existing gap within the gap of the physics, that or the technology aspect. There is also this, that there is bias in the data, or there is no data, or to point out, or just to make that a topic of conversation within the lab environment, is a very good start. So I think with whatever I'm seeing, just creating this awareness, bringing it in the regular conversations, talking more about including gender lens is going to make an improvement, because next time when you're doing research, and I mean, some research is very evident, right? Where you have to have females versus males,
Mm-hmm.
but most of them are not. So, like, I can tell you about the car seat belt design. Like, I always struggle with my car, and I have to like push my seat forward, up, this, that, to make sure that I fit in properly. So there is an issue. Pregnant females have way more discomfort and issue when they're driving with that car seat belt. So that's a simple example. Maybe somebody's working on it already, but it's such a simple problem, right? But whoever was doing research about it probably was not aware enough to, or was not exposed to, thinking of it in this manner. So we really have to be just, we have to ask the right questions to ourselves, and this has to become a part of the system. I think
Absolutely.
it has to be embedded within the curriculum. So I do not expect suddenly, like one day, a grad student will wake up and be like, okay, today I'm going to think about gender lens. It has to become a part of the system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you. There's a couple things I wrote down that you said when asking the questions. So one, I'm going to shout out your workshop. You did a gender um, lens or gender bias workshop a couple times. And I think we're going to try to do that soon here at Purdue University. But I remember being part of that workshop, and I remember working with the student, and the student was like, I'm building this device. I don't want to necessarily name the device because I don't know if it's published yet. But he's like, I'm building this device and it affects the blood. Let's just say that. And so there's no gender lens needed. And we were just like, well, how's the device operate? And he says it wraps around the arm or something. And I was like, well, is there a difference between a male arm? Well, he said chest or arm. And I said, well, is there anything different about a male chest versus a female chest? is there a difference between the fat content and all the stuff? And he started, and like I could see the light bulbs going off in his mind. He just never, it was not a consideration, like and then also I'm like, the design of that, like, so your design of this belt or something that goes around the chest is going to look different on a female versus male.
Yeah.
It's going to look different. It's going to work differently too, but like, it just wasn't it never even got that far in his mind. But I think one, asking appropriate questions, and then also the conversations, right? There's probably not enough conversations around these topics of racial bias or gender bias or lenses and these things. They're not standard, I would say, standard topics of conversation. And when they become standard conversations, I think we'll do a better job of including these things and into the STEM research. So,
and I want to add a point here that although this is one aspect of design and data bias that exists within research and the primary level of research that we're talking about, or curriculum, but like I am working also on the problem of climate change driven mass migration. And honestly, it was just a modeling problem where we wanted to, kind of include all the aspects that affect climate change driven mass migration and make sure that whatever technologies and renewable energy resources that we are establishing through research in our lab is used, diligently in different sections of the world in the correct manner. So what I mean to say is that it has to be more optimized, because when you think locally, one section of the world might need a very different set of renewable energy resources, a very different, needs are different.
Yeah, needs are different. I definitely went to a workshop that way too in Rwanda. And I think it was an innovation workshop where we were presenting our technology to the local people. And one person developed the technology that required it to be plugged into the wall. And they're like, we can't use that technology. While it was a great piece of technology, but we can't use it. And so they had to rethink about how they apply that to that section of the world. They were like, oh, it's low cost, it's easy to use. And they're like, we don't have the energy power for it.
Yeah.
And so now they had to change it to now including a solar panel with it. And that seemed to work out a little bit better.
So that's the point, right? Like, problems are more localized as compared to what we make of it, especially at our stage of research, firstly. So more awareness there is definitely required. But now think of like the climate change driven mass migration through a gender lens. So if you look at the intersectionality of mass migration and gender, females, when they are migrating, go through very different experiences as compared to males. And so whatever interventions, programs have been designed, they kind of, the problems of those females, their health, sanitation issues, and so much more, it gets lost in the transition.
Yeah, it's the overgeneralizing of the problem, which I was stating before, is like, we're just like, oh, they're all people, they're all migrating.
Yeah.
But they're different.
They're different.
And that's what I was saying. There's got to be this kind of like this sweet spot where we were considering the differences in people, and we're considering them in this universal sense too. So like, you can't get away by overgeneralizing a whole population. It's just
exactly
poor.
50% of the world population is female. So we have to be, we have to include them. Otherwise, we are losing more than we are, this ignorance is just leading us to losing good economy, good, sustainable development, everything, like anything you can talk about, we are losing if we are not being inclusive of everybody. So I think that's what should, that's what motivates me and should motivate all the engineers, because we are striving towards a better world. We are trying to create better technologies, get more sustainable. But if we are just being ignorant about this part of gender lens or racial lens or, the social impact itself, we are actually at a loss here. So we really need to include that. But yeah, that's some additional points.
No. That's great. This has been an amazing episode. I think this is a very important episode because of the things that it talks about here. One, I love learning about, experiences that are different from my own. And, I see some similarities between some of the fears that you have when you transitioned here. I didn't necessarily have to go through the same things you did, but I felt some of those same feelings, being sick, being stressed, and being afraid to talk about those things and share those things with people. Um, and feeling like I shouldn't complain. This is just normal. This is what everybody goes through, and you learn differently. So I thank you for sharing your experience. I thank you for sharing some of your research. I think it's really impressive, and I challenge all the people listening to the podcast to consider a gender lens and even a racial lens, now that we talked about that too, to your research and to the things that you do. How does this impact people who are different in gender or different in race or different in period? How could I make it inclusive so that it helps all those parties? So those are some of my takeaways. So for you, I thank you, Tanya Perar, for being on the podcast. And I ask the audience to like, comment, and subscribe below. Also, add any questions. And, I'll ask you guys, how do you guys feel like you're impacted by this podcast? And we'll take the understanding of gender lens. How much you apply it to your research? Or what advice do you have for making it easier for people to apply a gender lens to their research? Leave that comment below. And until next time, be excellent.